Okay, let's get started. Welcome everybody to our adventure into the world of conversational user interfaces. We want to give you a glimpse into what we experienced and why it is absolutely crucial to not go alone, but to take a friend with you.
Yeah, we are USEEDS, and some of you may know us already. We also have a booth over there if you're interested learning more about us. That's it for the moment, I guess, about us. If you want some more info about us, check us out online or go to the booth and ask us some questions. We are Pascal Becker.
Yeah, that's me. I'm a designer, and that's my wonderful colleague, Conny.
Okay.
And we come from both very diverse backgrounds. Didn't get into our fields directly, so kind of generalists, and that's all I'm going to say about this for now. So let's get right into it.
All right. So we have a client, which we called, for privacy reasons, Mr. Client from My Bank Incorporated. We've been working together for a very long time and have been building some innovation projects together. And they approached us, we approached them about this whole subject of conversational interfaces. And when we pitched it to them, they said, okay, well, that sounds really cool, but are you up for it? And to be honest, although we had like this long collaboration and a trusted relationship already, we were kind of unsure if we were up to the task. So maybe it was insane to do this, but in the end, no, we just had to do some tasks to get there. We had to build up some knowledge and create a new team that is interdisciplinary. And yeah, in the end, we wanted to have a proof of concept that we could show to their C-level. So, challenge accepted. We wanted to do that, and we were up for the task. But first, we were trying to figure out, okay, what would be the vision for this project, and we defined it as this, that we wanted to create an interface that is based on natural language, so a voice interface in that particular situation, and that it would be intuitive in their use and would be context aware. And the result in the end would be something like this, which we actually ended up doing. We could ask Alexa in this case, because we picked Alexa for this, about My Bank, which would be our client, and users could ask it for the current stock values or stock values throughout the week, and also add certain companies to their list, so in order to figure out how the stock would change during the week. So. We said, okay, we think CUIs are cool, and we had to take a closer look at this because we thought, well, we're a UX specialist agency, so we can't just think that that things are cool. We have to figure out how to make these things meaningful, and in this case, we wanted to take a closer look, which Pascal is going to talk about.
Yeah, that's what we do when you start out a project, and doing something innovative in a new field is no different. So we have to look into, even though if we want to do that, does the solution make sense for our client and the problem he's trying to solve? So we looked into CIIs, and CIIs can be seen as a way of an intelligent interface more than the others, kind of graphical user interfaces and older types of interaction we have right now, or that are pretty common. But just that it enables a more intelligent way of interaction doesn't make it better for every case. We saw that this morning in different talks. So I think everyone knows what we're kind of talking about. You can have conversational interfaces in chatbots or voice, and we mainly focused on voice for this. So, opportunities, it's like the brave new world. There's tons to explore, and it can be a way to create a more meaningful interaction and an intimate connection to your users. And that is usually only possible on one-to-one interaction, but this technology enables this personal level of communication at scale, which can be a massive opportunity for us. But it's not great for everything, and that's what you have to look at. So sometimes it's not the right channel to do, or it doesn't work on its own. You need to combine the information you have with different modes of interaction or different ways to display information. And maybe it's just not the right fit. So these are the points we looked at. And overall, looking at the field, it's good to get started. So we figured out that it made sense for our client and the problem they want to solve. But in general for them, as they are a forward-thinking business and want to be ahead of the curve, look at that, they still are, but it's almost too late if you wait for too long. It could be bad for your business, and that might end up in a situation like that we know from Star Trek, where you imagine you can talk to a system. It's just the way how things work in the future. It responds to you naturally, and it's going to be a huge disappointment if that interaction does not work at all or not as intended. Okay, client says, fantastic. He's excited to get this started, and so we formed a team to get this going that Conny is going to talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, we can all think about the concept, the design, everything that goes into it, but the most important part on this project was getting together a team that would play well together and that would be the best fit for this project. So yeah, collaboration meant in our team, build up a team that makes sense, but also how to integrate the customer into that more, the client. So what we did was we wanted to create a shared space. We had something like a war room where we all got together and could all work on one project together in this room and share it. We also worked together to figure out what our goals would be, our common goals throughout the disciplines, and also commit to them very early on. And our idea to get the client as close as possible to the current state of the project would be to give them a small, like the Echo Dot, and send that device over to them for them to be able to figure out what we're currently working on, to see where we are at. The biggest thing when we're talking about CUI is basically that we see that there are a lot of departments within a company, within our company, of course, but also within the client. And in Germany, we talk a lot about silos, and this is exactly what this is about. We wanted to kind of smash the departmentalism that exists throughout a lot of clients and even our own company sometimes. So we wanted to figure out how to overreach to other departments and how to work together in a meaningful way. And I think, of course, there will still be departments, there will still be this silo concept, but in the end, I think it was really interesting to see how we could kind of get everybody together and on the same page. To that extent, we also did something, we wanted to amplify the knowledge that we are building up in this case, and we did a workshop at Motor Talk, which is a subsidiary of eBay. And we did a workshop where we were trying to figure out which use cases are interesting and valuable for them, for their customer base, and that was really a lot of fun. And it also showed us how we could share the knowledge with other clients and with other UX specialists in the field. All right.
Okay, so having built up our team and our basic setting of how we're going to approach this project, building up knowledge about the field, of course, we get into design and talking about CUI, so I'm new to this as well. We found out there's some things that are really important. Context. Context matters so much more in a conversational setting than it actually does on a smartphone. It does as well, of course. We have to consider where the user is. But just imagine, I'm in a library. I cannot talk to my system, or I have my hands full, I'm cooking, of course I want to talk, I cannot type to the system. These are just basic examples of how context of the environment comes into play when designing these systems and thinking of where the user is going to be when they're performing a task. But, so when it comes to writing the language, I'm no linguist and I have no idea about this, but it's still the basic principles of design that apply here. And what I had to find out the hard way was spoken word and written word is totally different. So the first time you're going to write a dialogue, it's probably like, when I did it, it's going to be sounding horrible. But it's just trying over and over and speaking it out loud and acting with your colleague from the very get-go, and you're going to be going pretty fast. But also new is how can you talk to your customers as a brand, and how do you want to have your customers talk to you? It's a new way of having a language, of a brand language that extends beyond anything you know from visual design and typical style guides right now. So this is very new. You have written style guides for text language, but how is this expressed in voice and emotions? So with all of this, we're very much at the beginning. So this is just a brief look into getting started with voice design. There's tons to know about language and conventions that are building up in the field of CUI, just besides language in general. So how do users actually want to talk to the system? A simple example is, sometimes I don't want to have a conversation, I just want to shout music and have it play. This is not natural language between people, but works for a system. And that's what we have to figure out from the design side.
Yeah, and since this is a UX conference, I'm aware that development is going to make a lot of people sleep, although I know that a lot of you are also coding or love to code or are not afraid of coding. And I think that that's very interesting because I come from a design background and I made the move over to development. And I found that it's really interesting to see this kind of project from both sides and work together and seeing things from the side of development as well. So what I want to tell you about the development part of this project and of our collaboration is that a lot of the things that we do when we create conversational interfaces in code is that we can reuse a lot of the stuff that we usually do. So when we usually create a web app, a lot of the things that we build up can be reused. For example, a REST API that pulls the data from a data source can be used for a web app, but also can be used and can use the data for a conversational user interface. So that's really interesting. That makes it a lot easier, and that also gives us the chance to reuse a lot of the things that we do. The same thing goes, of course, for the privacy issue, where if we figure out how to deal with a certain privacy issue, for example, I want to find out something about a company and use Alexa for that. If we figure out how to deal with this and how to solve issues there in the legal area, then we also have a learning for other parts as well. There are some special things about coding for CUI that are CUI or CUI that are unique, that are not to be reused, but a lot of that as well is very easy entry. And I think that even if you're not really high-level developer right off the bat, it's still cool to start, and it can be really easy to use, especially if you use something like Google's Dialogflow, which is something where you're basically held by the hand and guided towards the process. So even if you're not a hardcore coder, I think it's a good way to get into the whole business of creating conversational user interfaces. A very, very short introduction into how these things work. You usually know, okay, I'm asking a conversational interface something like, for example, this echo dot, what is the weather right now in Berlin? And you get the response. And how this works is that there are certain keywords that Alexa finds and that it understands, and that it can allocate to the app or the skill that you've created. And even more interesting is that we usually, when we talk about these voice interfaces, we usually see the user and the device. But most of the magic that happens in the background is usually in the cloud and with an API. And a lot of that can be reused, as I said before. Now another boring tech slide. But what I want to show you about this is actually really interesting. We have the whole process of sending out or receiving a command and getting it back. But what I find interesting from a UX perspective is that you have something that's called SSML, which is the markup language, which is not too dissimilar from XML or other languages like this. And everybody who's coded somewhat of a web page throughout their lives is probably going to be it's not going to be too complicated. It's going to be really easy to understand and read and use. And especially the special thing about SSML is that you can actually give it intonation. It can stress, it can help the CUI stress certain words and give it character. So that's something that's, I think, worthwhile for UX designers. In the end, I want to leave you, in my development perspective of this, with something that I found a win-win. I think if developers and designers work together, as in this project, we can learn a lot from each other. We have a lot of influences that come from the IT world that have a huge influence on UX. Decisions on architecture, etc., have a huge influence on the UX in the end. And we also can learn to communicate a lot better, which was our case. We learned how to communicate with each other more effectively. But much more even than this is just trying and failing and trying again. And Pascal is going to say something about that.
Yeah, lastly, an integral part of every design development project obviously is testing. And we have testing at the third stage here. It's all linear, but you obviously have to see all that we just showed you is actually happening at the same time. So what's crucial here is you say test your designs and your prototypes early and often, but for CUI it's actually earlier and more often. It's just, you can start testing 5 minutes after you started the project, and you actually should, just like I told you before, it's going to sound horrible the first time you try it, but that's how you improve and actually learn how to write for spoken word. And we already showed you or mentioned a few of these things like Dialogflow that make it easy to test for specific devices. So there's simulators for Alexa, for Google Home that make it easy to just build up a skill without any functions behind it that just simulates the flow. But sometimes you want to have custom solutions or systems that don't work through the preset AI assistants, and then you have to come up with something else. So there's tools like Twine. That's a simple open source tool anyone can use, and it's really easy to build out complex flows and to simulate them in a browser setting where you can click whatever the user said, and then it reads out the next step, and you can have different things like bargains where the user interrupts the system and it stops, or you can repeat stuff. And so you can build up really complex settings of interactions and simulate any kind of dialogue or CI setting that you want. So this is really cool. I encourage you to try it out. But as we said, the collaboration of design and dev is really important here. And that means devs are testing and writing dialogues from the get-go. And I'm, as a designer, writing code to understand what they're doing, what they can do, and what the limits of the platform are. And that means, even as a designer, get started writing code for prototypes. You can build up a simple skill in Alexa in 15 minutes, and it's really easy, and you understand the platform more and understand your colleagues and how to support them, which helped us tremendously. And above that, technical prototypes are well and great, but get acting, try out the system, get the timing right, and don't just laugh and say, oh, it doesn't matter. Just get it right, try it, and you're going to see it's going to improve your product so much. But that's all we're going to say about this for now, so let's wrap this up.
Yeah, so in conclusion, there are some things that we wanted to leave you with and that we wanted to shout out if you're interested in creating a conversational interface yourself, especially in a tight-knit team. So our idea was to say, well, don't just talk about it, do it, 3, 2, 1, go. There's a great chance for not only the team to get together and learn a lot about each other and gather really valuable experiences, but also, if you include the client, to see their side, to understand what their needs are, and to incorporate that into your insights into this project. And it's really easy to get started. Of course it gets complicated. Of course it gets into the nitty-gritty where it's really, really getting very tough and complicated and not so easy. But the start is really easy. And it shouldn't scare you off at all. And the synergy effects that you have from working in such an environment, on such a subject, but also especially in a team that is multidisciplinary, are extremely valuable also for other projects. And we've learned that in the past that this togetherness of the different disciplines really helped us understand each other more. And also I think that it's great if you're already a generalist, this is going to be fun for you, but also if you're trying to become one, this is a good setting. So in the end, we had a very happy customer who actually asked us what we're going to tackle next, and we're sure to do that, of course. If you're interested in reading more about this, both of us actually, wanted to give a short shout out that we've both written about the subject. One really cool introduction into designing for voice is from Pascal, and I also wrote something more from a UX perspective on certain talks already touched on this subject, which I found really interesting. That you need grace, that you need to build trust, etc. Like what is the basis of creating conversational interfaces. So that's interesting, and also if you want to check us out on Medium. And of course, if you have any more questions or if you want to come and talk, our booth is over there. We're probably also going to hang out there. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing both perspectives, the technical perspective and the design perspective. I'm sure you've got questions right now, and we've got enough time for that, so just raise your hands. If not, I'm going to ask some questions. Because we're a UX and usability community, it would be quite interesting, at least to me, and I think to some of you as well, to know how you test with users when concepting those conversational dialogues?
Well, it sounds like it's a new thing, but it actually isn't. So it's the same old way of getting to it as it always is. You figure out what you want to test, you build up your hypotheses, and then you figure out what is the fidelity of the system you need to test that. So you can start research by asking the right questions to figure out what they need, but we build prototypes, and that's what you're gonna do probably, and it's set up like any other usability test pretty much. You write out your scenario, you explain what they have to do, and you walk through the prototype. And then it sort of depends on the fidelity of your prototype, so you can build up a prototype in code that doesn't have any complex functions behind it, but just goes through the dialogue and the various ways of the dialogue and just simulates the output. So it maybe gives static numbers or something like a simple click dummy would on a screen-based interface, and you can walk through the system by actually doing it on the device, like a Google Home or an Amazon Echo, or like you can test with more low-fidelity prototypes, like the Twine thing I just showed you, and then you maybe have a more complicated test setup since you don't want the user to see someone is clicking the buttons on what they said. So we sit them in a different room, have the guys in the observing room watch the participants and live stream what they're seeing, and then clicking the buttons, and maybe via a phone call or some type of audio transmission, we transmit back from the observing room to the guy who's being tested, and to him it feels like it's a real system. Maybe a bit shaky here and there, like a prototype is, but sort of it acts and behaves like a system would, and so you can fake the system really well for user testing. But as I said, the methods are the same, just figuring out how to apply it in a new domain.
Here's one question.
So when you, first of all, thank you as well for the presentation, but when you tested with actual users, did they appreciate it, or, well, they said, well, it doesn't matter, or for them, they didn't find an actual need to have such product at the end? What was their feeling?
Sort of depends on the case. So we did multiple different systems by now. So yes and no, depending on the system. So we had some that are rather complex dialogue flows and that worked really well and were seen like a real conversation. In our specific case here, where we did the bank thing, we noticed that some cases really work well, like checking my account balance and stuff like that, or doing simple interactions that don't require too much sensitive data, or where I don't have the feeling of where I can do something wrong by missing an input or entering complex data that might get heard wrongly. So there you enter the span where it gets tricky and people say, no, I don't feel comfortable with that anymore. Do you want to add anything? Okay.
Are there some open questions? If not, I would ask one last one. Sorry. Now that the systems behind it getting more intelligent, how do you think you need to adapt to that while designing and while developing to keep up with the new systems and with their intelligence?
You want to start? Yeah. So yeah, it's they're constantly changing, and the devices are changing, the frameworks that we use are changing, and you have to really keep up with it a lot. But I think that it's not much different from other projects in that respect. You have to make sure that you're up to snuff and that you react to new insights and new changes into the frameworks. And I think that's worthwhile. And it also depends on who your target audience is in that respect. So of course, if it's going to be a skill or an action, then you would have to figure out what the current status of that is, and look at other actions. And I mean, I can only speak for our team. We were always figuring out. We're always reading a lot of news, and especially when it comes to conversational interfaces. And we have a channel that we use where we discuss about these things constantly. So we're trying to really stay on top of the current developments. So yeah.
Just to briefly add to that, so as Conny mentioned, there's always some new additions, but it's mostly not changing the fundamentals, so rather adding a feature or a possibility that hasn't been there yet. And then if we see it worthwhile, we try to incorporate it. Say, systems allow for better context understanding now. Maybe I can get what the question before was and incorporate it. So we consider that for our new design and incorporate that into the code, but it doesn't change it fundamentally. Also, saying that systems get more intelligent so fast is a bit overstated, because they seem really intelligent and the interface for the user is rather intelligent, but the actual real reality is it's not very intelligent, and that's why not much is changing. It's just simple training on the sentences it might recollect or recognize and then reply what we gave them to reply.
Just one short addition to that. I think what's interesting is that we are seeing, okay, so now we have Echo Dot, but now there's also the view where, I think it's called view. The look. So you also have a display now, so you have to take that into consideration. But mostly it's not so much about, as you said, the device itself, but what you can do with it and how that changes your use case, and also the context. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that most of the frameworks still don't really make too many difference about that. I mean, it would be interesting to see, oh, okay, now you basically have a mode where you're outside and you don't want to say so many private things to the device. So I think that's something that needs a lot more work, and that would be very interesting in the future.
Okay. So let's see what comes in the future. Thank you very much, Pascal and Conny.